Dan Bledsoe, United States Marine Corps, Korea, the Forgotten War. I interviewed Dan in El Cajon, California. It was September 29th, 2005. It's been almost 20 years ago, folks. Dan's gone now. He passed away in 2016, but he told me a great story about how they fought in Korea, folks. He was in the Marine Reserves in 1949, served in an infantry battalion, and in June of 1950, the Korean War started. August of 1950, their unit was activated, and he went to Korea, served with the 1st Infantry Regiment in Korea. So, like I said, Dan's got one of the best stories I've ever heard about Korea, and I'm really happy to share it with you today. I'd like to thank Brandon Glidden again. Brandon, thank you for helping me tell these stories. It's been a great honor to work with you and to have your support of these stories. So I want to thank you again for sponsoring Dan's story for many people to hear and to see. And I want to let you know that Dan was an FBI special agent after he served in Korea, and he was actually involved with the Watergate tappings and that whole thing in the 70s. So folks, got a great story here for you today. And if you are interested possibly in helping sponsor one of these stories, adopting one of my veterans, I can share it with you like that. I have a lot of archived stories that I've done over the years, and those of you who've been watching my stories and following this channel know that I have a lot of stories to tell from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So if you'd like to maybe sponsor one of these stories, I would greatly appreciate it, and I know the families of these veterans would appreciate it. And a lot of our young people that are watching this today, they need to hear these things. It says freedom is not free, freedom is earned. They were born in a free country, folks, and they don't know the price for freedom. We need to share it with them through this documentary series. So thank you for sharing these videos, subscribing to this channel. Let's keep this thing going. And I'm proud to present to you Dan Bledsoe. God bless you.
I was a member of the Marine Reserve in San Francisco, and it was a Marine Reserve infantry battalion. I was the Chief Scout Sniper in the Combat Intelligence section of headquarters and service company of that reserve unit. The Korean War started in June of 1950 when the North Koreans invaded the South. The Marine Corps was short of manpower. They sent what they could over in August of 1950. Primarily consisted of one Marine brigade, and within the brigade there was a 5th Marine Regiment with supporting arms, one tank company, one engineer company, etc. We in the Marine Reserves were activated. We went down to Camp Pendleton. My unit was activated on the 1st of August of 1950. And upon arriving in Camp Pendleton, we were immediately processed, and most of us were placed in the 1st Marine Regiment. We sailed from San Diego for the Orient on the 15th of August, 1950. Arrived in Kobe, Japan on the 28th of August, and the 1st Marine Regiment went up to the Lake Biwako area. It's a beautiful area near Kyoto. And we staged our immediate combat assignment up there. There were a lot of mountainous terrain and water at the same time from Lake Biwa. And so after being there a few weeks, we went aboard attack LSTs and sailed from Kobe, Japan on the 10th of September, 1950. And we were one of the assault regiments at Incheon, Korea on September 15th, 1950.
Now, was that an amphibious landing?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Incheon had excessive tides, and we were sent up there on high tide, and we had to wait By the time we got in position, there was low tide, and we had to wait out until the high tide came in. So we didn't actually make the frontal assault on the seawall until 1900. That'd be 7 p.m. civilian time. The other assault regiment was the 5th Marine Regiment, and they landed just a little bit north of us on Wamido Island.
Higgins boats, the whole bit? I mean, came off LS?
Amtraks.
Okay, LVTs?
No, amphibious tractors. The reason that we landed at Incheon was that the UN forces were holding the perimeter around Pusan, and to relieve the military pressure on them, MacArthur decided to invade South Korea from Incheon and drive on the capital of Seoul. And we, the 1st and the 5th regiments, were the assault regiments at Incheon. And then we were later supported by the 7th Marine Regiment and other supporting arms of the 1st Marine Division. The Army 7th Division landed after us, and they drove south. They drove south to link up with the UN forces coming up from the Pusan perimeter. We fought from Incheon through Yangdong-po, across the Han River, into Seoul. Very intensive city fighting there, similar to what one sees today in Baghdad and the other Iraq cities. And after we secured Seoul, my regiment was relieved by a British regiment, and we went back to Incheon, and then we went on ship and went around the Korean peninsula from the east coast, around the peninsula to Wonsan up in North Korea. And we landed there. It was a peaceful landing. The South Korean military had already been through there and secured it. In fact, it was so peaceful that Bob Hope gave a U.S.F. show for the UN forces there at Wonsan. We landed after Bob Hope. We don't often cherish the thought, but we see a little bit of humor in it. This was October, November 1950. And MacArthur had decided that the 1st Marine Division, with 2 other Army infantry divisions in support, were to fight from the east coast of the North Korean peninsula across the mountainous chain to link up with the Army, the UN Army on the west coast. The Army there was comprised of the U.S. Army 8th Army, and then there was a British Commonwealth Division. There were some other UN forces there, and there was some Republic of Korea. The acronym for them were the ROK, R-O-K. They were fighting over there too. But over on the East Coast, when we landed, 4-1 Royal British Commando was assigned temporarily to fight with the 1st Marine Division as we were the spearhead across this mountainous terrain to get over and link up with the Army on the west side of the peninsula. We never did get over there. In October of 1950, the Chinese, through an Indian diplomat, told the American government that if we interceded in further invasion of North Korea, the Chinese would intervene. We went up, well, to begin with, the weather was like Indian summer in October. It was beautiful weather. But the forecast was for severe, severe weather. We had no instruction in mountain fighting. Here we are in an elite amphibious assault force, the 1st Marine Division, and yet we were to be Alpine troops and fight over these mountains. We didn't complain in the least about the assignment. MacArthur's rationale was that we were the 1st Marine Division was the best Marine division in the whole UN Army over there. And Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist government, he agreed. He said if we could defeat 2 or at least 2 regiments of the 1st Marine Division, we could roll back the rest of the other troops because they weren't as professional as we were. What happened in late October is the 7th Marine Regiment, which had been the reserve regiment at Incheon and Sewell, they were to be the spearhead going up and driving across the peninsula. We didn't have any, at that point we didn't have any cold weather clothing. All during that campaign we had no maps. We had to use Japanese maps. Very few of us read Japanese. And as a result, everything was in meters. So when supporting arms like mortars or artillery wanted to zero in on a target, we would look at the map and figure out to the best of our ability where we were, and then to confirm our target, we'd fire a round for effect, and that round would normally be a white phosphorus round. And then once it landed, then we could adjust, either elevate the muzzle of the cannon or the mortar, or deflect it to the right or left or drop it. And that's how the registrations took place over there. Late in October, as the 7th Regiment began going toward the west, before it got into the mountains, there was a small village called Sodong. We Marines who had landed at Wonsan, we went up by rail or by truck from Wonsan north to Hungnam. There are 2 major cities in North Korea on the east coast. One is Hungnam and the other one's Hamnung. Hamnung is the seaport, Hungnam is the industrial city, or it was before we destroyed it on our way out. So the 7th Marines started up, and they got up as far as Sodong, and they were hit hard by a Chinese division. And the 7th did very well up there. The Chinese came in, hit them hard, and then withdrew. They just faded into the snow. We were told by Army intelligence that we shouldn't be concerned about these Chinese. They're all volunteers, and we were told that a few Chinese laundrymen shouldn't slow us up in any effect, all right? We began to receive some winter clothing, which was, footwear was snow packs, and it was a calf-high rubber boot, and it was waterproof. But the disadvantage is when one wore them, and when you're going up and down very steep terrain, you perspire a lot, and as a result, the perspiration had no place to be absorbed, and as a result, then when you stopped and your circulation began to slow up, then this would begin to freeze. And so many of us, as a result, we suffered from frostbite and trench foot. Anyway, the 7th Marines were the split point of the 1st Marine Division. They were followed by the 5th Marine Regiment. The 1st Marine Regiment, we were to secure the main route of supply, and the acronym for the main route of supply is MSR. Now this MSR, this road, this was going to be the way we were going to get all of our supplies through these mountains, was with a road that was about 1 lane wide, by American standards. And the road was not paved. It was primarily a dirt road, and it ran generally from the East Coast up into these mountains. The Chinese, during the 1920s, had made a reservoir up in these mountains, and it was named the Chosin, spelled C-H-O-S-I-N, reservoir. That's the Japanese name for it. The Chinese name for the same reservoir is Changjin. Nevertheless, this reservoir was a water reserve source for power plants that the Japanese had built below the level of the reservoir down toward Hungnam. This was Hungnam's primary energy source. And this work was all done by Japanese direction, and undoubtedly the Koreans were the labor force that built this. As a result, there were villages from the sea going from east to west. Would be Sodong, the next would be Chinani, the next would be Koto-ri, the third would be Hagaru-ri, and the furthest to the west was U.S.M.C. Now, if you can picture, generally speaking, this Marine division in units, and we were going up the road very, very systematically. The Chinese had already hit us at Sodong. The 7th Marines were the spearhead regiment in the assault. The 5th was the second in line, and we in the 1st Marines, we, under Lewis B. Puller, also known as Chesty Puller, we were the anchor. We had a battalion at Chinani. That was the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. The 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, was at Koto-ri, and the 3rd Battalion moved on up to Hagaru-ri, 3rd Battalion, 1st. The Royal Marines came in late November, and I remember them being with us at Chinani, and later they went up to Koto-ri, and as the Chinese closed in on us, their colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Drysdale, was ordered to take a relief column from Koto-ri to Hagaru-ri, and his orders came from my regimental commander, Puller. Puller at the time was a colonel. He was one of the most outstanding Marines in the history of the Marine Corps, and that's saying quite a bit. I'd like to speak well of him after I describe where these units were. The weather closed in. I remember having Thanksgiving dinner at Chinani, and we had a mess kit, and we went through the chow line, the food line, and went out of the tent. We couldn't stand there. There was no place to keep warm and eat your dinner. You went outside, and by the time we got outside, it was as if one's food had been in the refrigerator for months. It was that cold. Anyway, the support forces were going up from Chinani to Koto-ri, and the Chinese, 120,000, if not more, maybe perhaps 140,000. They had come down on the flanks of us, our units, on the ridge lines, and then like a nutcracker, they had hit these 3 regiments. They hit the 7th and the 5th the hardest. We in the 1st Marines, we were hit, but not with the intensity that at this early point in the battle, the other 2 regiments were. The 7th Marines were at U.S.M.C, the furthest little wide spot in the road, going toward the west, and they were about to be relieved by the 5th Marines. And one battalion of the 5th Marines, I believe, as I recall, was up at U.S.M.C, and just about that time, the Chinese hit U.S.M.C and very severely with very intensive night infantry assaults. These assaults would normally take place between 2200 and 0400, in other words, between 10 p.m. and 4 in the morning. The weather conditions at that time was well below zero. I'd say 20 below. The Chinese undoubtedly were as miserable as we were, let's put it that way. But nevertheless, they hit us, and these battles would normally start off with a fireworks display. I mean, it wasn't for, they weren't celebrating the American 4th of July, believe me. What they were doing is signaling to one another. The Chinese had no air force. They had some small artillery pieces. Believe it or not, there was a mounted unit on Mongolian horses up there. But the vast complement of the Chinese Communist forces were infantry. They had very little radio support between units. So they signaled one another by flares and by bugle calls. And then the lower units, say at company level, below battalion but at company level, those officers would lead by blowing a whistle. It was almost like a British Bobby's whistle. It wasn't like an American athletic referee whistle. Well, as soon as one would hear this, all of a sudden we'd be hit intensively. And they would hit the units. Some of the Chinese would be armed and some of them wouldn't. But if whatever weaponry they had, there would be another wave to come over them, pick up whatever weapons they could from the fallen dead Chinese, and then they would still hit us. That was the nature of the battle at U.S.M.C and Hagaru and down at Coiterie and to a degree at China Ni. Let me explain the military structure of the Chinese units. The Chinese units had two lines of command, political and military. And the military people were all called comrade. One was not a lieutenant, he was a comrade lieutenant or the equivalent thereof. Or he was a captain, or he was a major. But these officers at the middle management level, at field grade level, never made a decision without the endorsement of the political commissar assigned to that unit. And these political officers went down to the company level. So it was to motivate these troops. Naturally, they were atheists, so you couldn't talk to them about a superior being, a spiritual superior being. So the military management factor had to have the endorsement of the political factor. As far as the dress of the day goes, the Chinese wore these gray padded uniforms and a winter cap that had flaps on it to pull down over the ears, and within the hat was sewn animal fur, probably dog fur. The footwear was an over-the-ankle lace-type canvas shoe. And there was no gloves, as I recall. There were no gloves. They were armed with primarily Russian-made weapons, Chinese weapons relieved from the Chinese forces at the end of the Second World War, or they were American-made weapons that the Chinese nationalists had, and when defeated, the Chinese communists used the nationalists' weapons, and they often just encompassed those Chinese nationalist soldiers and just said, well, if you want to eat, in essence, well, you're going to fight for us. And most of these Chinese couldn't read or write. The American Marine, to keep warm, by this time the temperature was down to at least 30, 35 degrees below zero. There's no place to go. I mean, the wind was about 70 degrees below zero wind chill factor. So to keep us warm, I recall I had on 2 pairs of socks and these snowpacks that I described. I had a pair of long johns on and a pair of all wool marine green winter trousers. And then I've got a pair of Army windbreaker type trousers. Then on the upper part, I actually had the long johns and a marine wool shirt, and then a wool vest, Army wool vest, a marine dungaree jacket. That's the work jacket. It has a lot of pockets, and that's where you kept whatever you wanted to keep, which was very little, and then a pile line coat and a pile line hat, and over that we put our helmet on that. Now, to keep one's feet dry, what one would do is have a 3rd pair of socks, hopefully. I did. And what I would do is take the 3rd pair and put that pair next to my body, and I would be able to dry the sock out with my body heat. It smelled awful, but at least it was dry. So during the day, in between these battles, between cleaning our weapons and digging a better defensive position to fight, why then what one would do was take off his footwear, take off his socks, and massage his feet, and then change 1 pair of socks and put everything back on, and put a pair of socks in next to your body and dry it that way. Because of the military situation, many Marines couldn't do that. They ended up losing their feet, their hands. Several Marines froze to death up there, and that brings up the medical service. The Marine Corps does not have a medical arm. The medical assets come from the Navy, and they're wonderful people. There's a corpsman with every 50 Marines in the rifle companies, and we protect him. Many of them they're not even armed because of the Geneva Convention limitation on them. Some of them do carry a weapon for defensive purposes. Roughly in a Marine battalion, there is 1 MD, 1 doctor, and he has a small corpsman unit with him. And they set up what is known as an aid station. So when a Marine is hit, then we try to get the wounded man to the aid station, and he's treated there, and when possible evacuated. Well, there was no way to evacuate our wounded from Korea. Most of us, when we were hit, and this was very common, if we were hit, I remember a friend of mine being hit. We were in one firefight during one night, and he was hit in an artery in the crotch. And he crossed his leg, and he died of shock. And there's some pictures taken by Douglas. He was a photographer for Life magazine, and you're going to see one picture of the Marines coming out of the reservoir, and on top of this one caisson, there's some corpses, Marine corpses, and one of these Marines had his legs crossed, and that's how I identified my friend. All right, so what would happen with all of these casualties, even if we could get them to the battalion aid station, out of 1,000 Marines, they might have had, 200-300 at one time, and they would just do dressage. They would look at him, and if they could stop the blood, they'd put him in his sleeping bag. We were issued these sleeping bags. And we carried them over our shoulders sometimes. We carried them any way we wanted to carry them. Anyway, the wounded would be put in the bag, and then he would be put outside in the snow in this severe weather. The first aid station would be a pyramidal tent, and there was no electricity in there. One corpsman would hold a flashlight. The doctor would do whatever surgery he could do on the wound, and then he would decide whether he could save him or not. It was so cold up there that these corpsmen, to keep the morphine liquid, they would keep the morphine in their mouth and keep the morphine warm, or at least liquid by that. There was no blood transfusions that I recall. I could be wrong on a lot of these things. But the naval personnel were outstanding. So a dressage would be done. They would take the Marines, the wounded, and they would say, no, these people are going to die within an hour or 5 hours. Put them aside. Maybe these Marines that are only hit in the arm or the leg, severe wounds, they can't walk, they can't fight. Maybe they can live if they just keep them warm. And so they'd put them out in the snow and hope for the best. And then for we other Marines, it would be, say we'd get a nick here and a nick there. Normally we would be treated by some sort of medical personnel, but there wasn't any medical personnel around to do that. That's why so many of us suffered from frostbite and some froze to death. We were very fortunate to have air support. Marine and Naval air support covered us during the day as we withdrew in units. There was no rout at any time. All the withdrawal from the Chosin was all in orderly fashion, primarily because we had outstanding military leaders. Most of our officers had been veterans of World War II. Most of our senior NCOs were veterans of World War II. So the leadership was outstanding. Never at any time during that whole battle do I ever recall anyone ever even bringing up the word of surrender. We used to say some rather negative things about General MacArthur, which I will not repeat because I know this is going to be edited. But the morale was always high. We would, during the day, the Air Force and the Marines would drop us supplies from these cargo-type aircraft by parachute. And sometimes they would land down in a valley. And on one side of the valley was the Chinese, the other side was ours. And I remember running down, or I was ordered to take a detachment, go down and get as many supplies as I could. We got down to where the drop zone was, and half the Chinese were there too, and so we had one hell of a battle right then and there. And we brought back some medical supplies like blood plasma and ammunition. We were issued a unit of fire, 2 units of fire every day, which was 140 units. So if we had 2 units of fire, it would be 280 units. And a unit of fire is what a Marine rifleman or whoever would normally use in a firefight. So in these battles, night battles that I described, what we would do is get ready. We knew they were going to hit us at night. We'd have our ammunition all located in bandolier form so we could just reload and fight. And we were given so many grenades at night, and once you once you used all your grenades, then what we used to do is take our canteens. We each would carry 2 canteens, and the weather was so cold that the water in the canteens would freeze, and so we'd use them. They were just like bricks, and we'd throw them at the Chinese, and the next day we'd go out when the sun comes up and to recover our canteens. And from my assignment there, I was a scout sniper, and in this phase of the battle, I was assigned to 1st Battalion, 1st Marines at Chinani, and I was ordered to go out and bring back either a prisoner or a body. I never brought back either. Reason being, one of my first experiences going out, I went out with a rifle squad, and it was a beautiful light snow. It's like something out of a wood print. You see just beautiful, quiet snow, no breeze. And there was a grammar school house, maybe I'd say a mile from where my battalion was entrenched. And this patrol was to go out, and we felt there were Chinese activity up there, but we wanted to make sure. So we started out in column in the snow. Snow was above our knees and below our hips, and we're wallowing along in this snow in column. And I was at the lead of the column, and I saw some movement up there in the snow. And I told the NCO in charge of the patrol, I said, there's movement up here. And so we fanned out, and once we were in position, he said, challenge them. Well, to say, come here, we're friendly, you say, komi ra. So what I did, I said, komi ra, and I'm standing up. And the next thing I knew, I received all of this incoming light green fire from this enemy force that was firing on us. We immediately returned the fire, and we made a frontal assault against them. And we had hopes of capturing one, or at least finding a body. We got up to where they had been. We had fired, and once they received incoming fire, they withdrew in order. We got up to the position where they had been when they fired upon us. They had picked up everything but their brass. In other words, they took their dead, their wounded. There was blood on the snow, spent cartridges, and they had very subtly taken a little piece of rag and tied it on one of the weeds. Now, the reason they did that was when they send a patrol out at night, they'll come up to that mark, that tag, and they'll say, this is where we were last, and they'll probe further in toward the enemy line, which was us. We withdrew, we went back, and I went to the battalion intelligence officer, S2, and I was debriefed, and I told him what I had just related to you. He then asked me my opinion. It was very rare that a lieutenant ever asked a corporal what his opinion was. So I told him, I said, I fought the North Koreans in Incheon and Seoul, but whoever we're fighting now, they're really professional. The North Koreans, they would leave their wounded, they'd leave their dead, and they would just run. I said, these people maintained fire discipline. They withdrew in good order. It was a deliberate withdrawal. It was not a rout. And I said, I don't know if they're Russian. I don't know if they're Chinese. I don't know whether they're from the moon, but they're not North Koreans. Because we didn't know what Russia's position was at this point in history. We were at the reservoir. We were roughly 80 miles from the Manchurian border in a straight line. We were a little bit over that distance in Russia. So when we were estimating who were we fighting at that time, we surmised they were Chinese, but we didn't know definitely that they were Chinese. Later on in the battle, after killing several of them, the morning after the firefight, I would go out into the snow and go through the pockets of the ones that we killed for intelligence reasons. And the Chinese soldier normally carried a red book. It looked like before the computer age, we Americans had bank savings books. And this is what it looked like. It had his name in Chinese and his unit, and then it was marked every time he was paid. Why, then there was a notation made in the book. So from this book, we had Chinese American Marines with us at the battalion intelligence section, which was only a few men, probably half a dozen. We'd take them and they'd say, oh yeah, that's the 718th Regiment from Shanghai. And this is the reason, this is how we could identify the units that we were fighting against.
I want to ask you a question here, as we're getting close to the end of the tape, but you were a sniper now. How did you perform your duties? Did you shoot them? I mean, what were you doing? What did you?
Yeah, a sniper, a scout sniper, he goes out and he's trained to gain military intelligence at the field level. Okay. Now, if he's not on a scouting mission, then he's used as a sniper to take out enemy forces. And I was armed with a 1917 Springfield rifle with a 12-power scope mounted on it. And it's a clip-fed weapon that holds 5 cartridges. Now, before we left Pendleton, we had zeroed in our weapons for 150, 200 yards, because that's normally the combat range. And that's pretty true. But oftentimes we snipers, we would be told, now look, take out the political authority. As I mentioned to you, there was 2 lines of command, the political and the military. What we would try and do is take out both. And the way we would do it, we would just lay in wait and let the enemy unit come closer and closer and wait and wait and wait and watch everyone. And body language would tell snipers like myself who was in command, because normally these subordinates, these rice eaters from Shanghai, they're going to turn around and they're going to look. And if someone says, hey, go over there, that's where they go. And if they get over there and all of a sudden they look around again to the same authority, that's the person we're going to take out, all right? Now, using the sniper rifle is great if you're going to take someone out. The ideal way to do it is to hit them right between the eyes. It's quick, it's painless, and at the same time it has a very, very definite impact on the morale of the enemy forces when all of a sudden 1 minute their leader's alive and the next minute he's got a round between the eyes. What would happen then is they would often just simply deploy and spread out until a new leader showed up, because they weren't about to make any move until they were told to. So they wore no rank. The Chinese military wore no rank. A few of them wore a red armband around one of their arms with, sometimes it was just one solid band with no Chinese characteristics on it at all. Sometimes there was something on it. We weren't that well educated, and we Marine snipers, we didn't give a damn anyway, because we were going to kill them. And that's what we often did. Now, using a weapon like that is fine during daylight hours, and you have a lot of time to pick your target and take him out. At night, in these major infantry battles, it was useless. At the beginning, I would take off the scope and use the iron sight, which we Marines call an iron sight. I would just use that because when you see someone moving at a fast rate of speed, you might get him with a scope, but at night you're not going to get him with a scope. At least not during the Korean War. Now, probably these scopes that the American military are using now are far more sophisticated, and they probably can use them at night. But in 1950, we did not. We used what we were issued, and it was a 12-power telescopic sight. So originally I'd take the scope off and put it in my clothing, but it was very delicate. I mean, you can't be moving like this and keep something that delicate. So what I would do is eventually I'd just use an M1 just like any other Marine rifleman that was clip-fed, 8 rounds, and there were always plenty of them because we'd pick up a weapon off the battlefield. You know, a Marine who was killed in action, you just, sorry to say what we do, we took his ammunition, his weapon, or anything else we could use to keep fighting.
I've talked to a lot of World War II veterans, and they mention the camaraderie of the Marine Corps. Do you have any comments on the pride and the camaraderie of the Marines that you can share with people?
Oh, yes, yes. The camaraderie, everyone has a nickname. And my nickname in the company was Scope Eye because I was a sniper. I had that scope. We had nicknames for every one of us. And, you know, most of us, at Incheon and Seoul, I was just 19 years old. And I had just turned 20 when I fought at the Chosin. So we young people, we always think that life is never going to change. If we ever get home, I'll call you. So you get a Marine's name and a phone number. Very seldom would we ever get a street address. Because you say, oh, that's where my parents live. All right? Well, you get home and time goes by and you get on with your own life. You go back to school, you get a job, get married, whatever. And you lose contact. And that's why these veterans organizations are now so popular, because we're in our senior year, or senior years of age, and we'd like to know whatever happened to Sam or Charlie. And it's phenomenal. Being a retired person, it's one of my favorite pastimes. But the camaraderie is great. Another is Puller. Lewis B. Puller was a Marine that is from Virginia. He enlisted in the Marines to fight in the First World War, stayed in the Marines, and he, as a result of the Chosin, was awarded his 5th Navy Cross. He was an outstanding Marine. I've never known him to order a subordinate to do anything that he hadn't done. And he must have done this quite often with different groups of his regiment. But if he called, one time he called the snipers together. And he said, don't get too close to one another. Keep spread out in this circle. And the wind's blowing and the snow's coming down. And we were thinking, well, what in the hell he wants to talk to us for? And he says, you men, you're great. I sent you scout snipers out. You come back, you report, we fought the enemy in the north. We've got him in the south. We've got him in the east. We've got him in the west. He says, you just did a great job, and I thank you for it. He said, I don't need you now as scouts. I need you as rifle NCOs. And he says, the reason I say that is we're completely surrounded and the bastards won't get away from us now. And that was Puller. I mean, he had management skills that I've always admired, I've respected. And this is the camaraderie we had. We never, ever, as I mentioned earlier, we never thought of surrendering. We never leave a wounded out there alone. And the bonding is just outstanding.
Dan, I've asked all the World War II veterans this question. I'm going to ask you, and as you look back now, being a veteran, an American citizen, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom means to me, for me to speak my mind, have my opinion, and either worship a God or not worship a God. To go to Colorado to go hunting, or to stay in California and sit on the beach. To me, this is freedom.
What about the price for freedom? What would you tell a young person today who doesn't know about war or the consequences of war? What would you say to them about the price of freedom?
I would say that for every obligation, there's a responsibility. If you love your country because of the freedom you get from it, you're responsible for defending it. Americans have enlisted in the Marines to defend their country. I really don't. If you ask a Marine why is he so loyal, he would probably say, because I'm defending my country and the freedom that we stand for. We're not mercenaries. We're not, contrary to some of the political beliefs at this time, we're not overjoyed about spreading freedom throughout the world. That's a very idealistic position to take. But Marines are primarily there, no matter where in the world, to defend the United States. So.
Do you think our society is forgetting about war, or World War II, Korea? Korea's referred to as the forgotten war. Do you think we're forgetting? And then secondly, do you think it's important that we remember?
Yes, I think we are forgetting, but not. I don't think it's a serious threat. And it's most important that we all remember. It's been my experience as a civilian citizen. I've talked to some younger people about military science, and you mentioned the word Korean War, and they don't even know where Korea is. It doesn't offend me. It just shows the disinterest that people have. We all are given these gifts. God, and I believe in God, very much so. We all have these gifts. Some of us are given the gift of being outstanding Marines or fighters, or law enforcement people, or communication specialists, or MDs, or medical personnel. Some aren't. Look at some of our musicians that are very popular. Some of them haven't even had a formal education, or most of them haven't even finished high school. But look how great they are, see? They definitely, all of us serve a purpose in society.
I'm about at the end. At the end of my interviews, I've always asked the veterans to do something, and I'm going to ask you if you can, for use in my film. And I know it's not appropriate to salute uncovered inside, sitting down, but I asked the veterans to give me a salute into the camera. Can I ask you to do that?
Oh, sure, certainly.